Assalamu alaikum ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuhu. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on elderly people and persons with disabilities in the OIC member states. It's a joint event organized by the Statistical, Economic and Social Research and Training Center for Islamic Countries, SESRIC, and Directorate General of Disabled and Elderly Services at the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Services of the Republic of Turkey. I would like to thank our distinguished panelists who joined us from different regions of the OIC for accepting our invitation and designating time to participate in this important webinar. Also, I would like to extend my deep thanks and appreciation to everyone who is watching our live stream today and whoever is going to watch the recording later. Let me introduce myself first. I am Onur Çağlar, the Acting Director of Training and Technical Cooperation Department at SESRIC. I am delighted to moderate the webinar today. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Nebil Dabur, Director General of SESRIC, to deliver his welcoming remarks. The floor is yours, Excellency.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I wish you all a very good day. It is indeed my great pleasure to address this webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on elderly people and persons with disabilities in the OIC member states. We at SESRIC are delighted to co-organize this webinar with the Directorate General of Disabled and Elderly Services at the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Services of the Republic of Turkey. On behalf of SESRIC, I would like to extend my sincere thanks and appreciation to all of you for accepting our invitation to contribute to this webinar, and I welcome you all. Today, we are virtually gathered to discuss the common challenges and obstacles facing elderly people and persons with disabilities in the OIC member countries during these difficult times of the global COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Our valuable panelists from different regions of the OIC will shed the light on this important topic and share their respective authorities' best practices and country experiences. Dear participants, the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic since late last year has spanned the globe in an unprecedented way, with severe impacts on various socio-economic sectors and all members of society. The consequences on the vulnerable groups, including the elderly and persons with disabilities, were particularly challenging. With the limitations of social security and health systems in some OIC countries, the pre-pandemic health conditions of these groups unfortunately brought about higher risk of infection, where the limited and uncoordinated response policies have resulted in dramatic consequences in terms of loss of lives. On the other hand, some member countries have managed to take a wide range of successful measures to protect the elderly and persons with disabilities during the pandemic. These measures include introducing symptom screening, social distancing requirements, detection and quarantine procedures, awareness campaigns, designated curfew hours, and the adoption of national or local guidelines and preparedness plans. It is worth mentioning here that those countries which have so far recorded successful policy outcomes on elderly and persons with disabilities during the pandemic have ensured an effective coordination among various public authorities, such as the Ministries of Health and Social Affairs, in developing and executing their response policies. Distinguished participants, despite the high value and the great importance given to the elderly people and persons with disabilities in Islam, in some member countries, these vulnerable groups are unfortunately still facing various forms of discrimination, maltreatment, disrespect and failing to observe their basic right. In fact, only few OIC member countries have adequate mechanisms and policies in place to fully cater for the needs of the elderly and persons with disability. Therefore, we need to acknowledge the importance of fostering an inclusive culture and responding to the urgent needs of these vulnerable segments of people in all aspects of society, especially during the crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. Given the current situation of elderly and people with disabilities, it seems that the governments of our member countries have to act now with more enhanced intra-OIC cooperation towards the development of more inclusive and responsive systems to the needs and rights of those people in all their diversity. In this context, it is worth mentioning that the situation of the elderly people and persons with disabilities has been given special attention at the OIC level, where some strategic documents are developed and adopted towards raising awareness and improving the situations of these vulnerable groups through enhancing intra-OIC cooperation. For example, the OIC 2025 Program of Action, which was adopted in 2016, identified a goal with a view to developing effective and reliable social services for elderly and people with special needs in OIC member states. Recently, the OIC strategy on the elderly has been adopted by the member countries during the first session of the OIC Ministerial Conference on Social Development held in December last year in Istanbul. The conference also reviewed and discussed the framework on the draft OIC Plan of Action on people with disabilities. In fact, such OIC high-level decisions and resolutions on adopting such strategies documents in the domain of elderly and people with disabilities are all indicators on the national commitment towards implementing of a wide range of national policies and best practices in OIC member states. Dear participants, in this context, I am proud to inform you that our center CISRIC has made a significant technical contribution to these important OIC strategic documents through the preparation of the related background research studies, such as the state of elderly in OIC member countries and people with disabilities and special needs in OIC countries. We at CISRIC will continue to take an active role in this important domain through contributing to the preparation of further strategic documents and facilitating the implementation of these documents. CISRIC will also contribute to improving the capacities of the relevant national institutions in our member countries, with a view to enhancing social and economic well-being of elderly and people with disabilities. In particular, we are ready to partnership the relevant national institutions in our member countries in organizing virtual seminars, webinars, training, and capacity building programs in this important domain. I believe that the exchange of knowledge and sharing of experiences and best practices among our member countries, especially during these difficult times, are more needed than ever. Therefore, I hope that this webinar will contribute to our efforts towards enhancing intra-OIC cooperation and dialogue in this important area, and would introduce some good practices and stimulate collective actions. Before concluding, I would like to thank you all once again and wish you fruitful exchange of experiences and productive discussions that can hopefully inspire the relevant authorities in the OIC countries in setting and executing effective national policies. Thank you all for your kind attention. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your insightful remarks. Now I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Orhan Koç, Director General of Disabled and Elderly Services at the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Services of the Republic of Turkey, to deliver his welcoming remarks. The floor is yours, Excellency.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Bugün burada İslam İşbirliği Teşkilatımızın üye ülkeleriyle ve SESRİK vasıtasıyla bir araya gelmiş bulunmaktayız. Bundan dolayı çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Tabii tüm dünyayı etkisi altına alan COVID-19 ile ilgili salgının etkilerini ve oluşmuş olduğu olumsuz durumları karşılıklı bilgi alışverişini yaparak bu toplantıyı gerçekleştireceğiz inşallah. Bu anlamda üye ülkelerimizdeki engelli yaşlı alandaki yapılan hizmetleri de hep beraber karşılıklı değerlendirmiş olacağız. Tabii bu süreçte şunu gördük ki kültürlerimizin, geleneklerimizin, göreneklerimizin, inançlarımızın bu gibi durumlarda ne kadar önemli olduğunu bir kez daha görmüş olduk. Hamdolsun ki bu değerlerimiz, sunduğumuz hizmetleri engelli yaşlılarımıza her zaman öncelik vermemizi sağladı ve sağlamaya da devam ediyor. Biz bütün hizmet anlayışımızı önce insan ilkesi, evrensel insan hakları yaklaşımı ve aile odaklı bir bakış açısıyla gerçekleştiriyoruz. Sosyal ve sağlık ve sosyal hizmet alanında son dönemlerde çok büyük başarılar elde ettik ve sağlıklı dönüşüm gerçekleştirdik. Aynı şekilde sosyal hizmetlerde de bir dönüşüm gerçekleştirilmiş oldu. Bu süreçte ülkemizde ve dünyada sağlık çalışanlarının özverili çalışmalarını gördük. Sosyal hizmet alanında çalışanların özverili çalışmalarını gördük. 7-24 saat herkes yaşamlarını ödün vererek özverili bir şekilde çalışmış oldu. Böylece tüm dünyadaki sağlık çalışanları ve sosyal hizmet alanında çalışanlarına teşekkür ediyorum. Batı ülkelerinde ve gelişmiş ülkelerde görmüş olduğumuz olumsuz yansımaları hep beraber izledik. Özellikle yaş triajı uygulaması diye ifade edebileceğimiz, yaşlılara öncelik vermek yerine gençleri veya sağlıkla ilgili sorunu az olanlara öncelik verme uygulamaları hayata geçtiğini gördük. Ülkemizde ise hamdolsun engelli yaşları her zaman öncelik verdi. Sağlık hizmetlerinde olsun, pandemiyle ilgili süreçlerde de öncelik verildi. Ve bu hizmetlerin tümü ülkemizde engelli ve yaşlara yönelik yapılan hizmetler, pandemideki hizmetlerin tümü ücretsiz bir şekilde sağlandı. Tüm yaşlarımız ve engellerimize testlerinden tutun da ilaçlarına kadar, sağlık hizmetlerindeki erişimlerine kadar tüm hizmetler ücretsiz şekilde verildi, verilmeye de devam ediyor. Bu açıdan baktığımızda ülkemiz gerçekten sosyal hizmet anlamında ve sosyal güvenlik kurumu anlamında, sağlık hizmetleri ve GSS anlamında, genel sağlık sigortası anlamında çok başarılı hizmetler verdi. Tabii biz bu hizmet anlayışımızı temellendirirken öncelikle bütünleşik bakım sistemi dediğimiz bir sistem felsefesiyle hareket ediyoruz. Aileyi güçlendirerek aile yanında yaşlı ve engelliyi desteklemek, aile yanında sosyal hizmet verebilmek, gündüz hizmetleriyle bunu sürdürebilmek, kurumsal bakım ihtiyacı olan bireyleri de kurumsal bakım alarak ücretsiz bakım hizmetlerini sürdürebilmek şeklinde yürütüyoruz. Bugün itibariyle bu hizmetlerimiz COVID döneminde de devam etmekte oldu. COVID döneminde de tüm ihtiyaç duyan vatandaşlarımız hizmetleri verdi. Tabii ülkemizde özellikle engellilik alanında çok ciddi çalışmalar yapıldı. 2005 yılında sadece engellilere yönelik özel bir kanun hazırlandı. 1500 maddelik bir kanunla bu düzenleme altına alındı. Birleşmiş Milletler'in erişilebilirlikle ilgili sözleşmesine ilk imza atan ülkelerden olduk. Ve bütün mevzuatımızı buna uyumlaştırmış olduk. Bunun sonucu olarak bugün engelliler eğitimde fırsat eşitliğinden sağlık hizmetlerine erişime, sosyal hayata katılıma kadar, istihdama buluşana kadar birçok döngüde ve birçok süreçte çok önemli kazanımlar elde etmiş oldular. Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımızın Recep Tayyip Erdoğan'ın özellikle engelliler alanında, yaşlar alanındaki hizmetlere öncelik verdiğini buradan ifade etmek isterim. Bu bağlamda da 2020 yılını erişilebilirlik yılı ilan etmişti. 2020 yılında da biz tüm ulusal bir ödül töreni yaptık ve ciddi manada katılım elde edilmiş oldu. Yakın zamanda inşallah bunun ödül törenlerini yapacağız. Belki ilerleyen süreçte uluslararası bir organizasyon yapmayı hedefliyoruz. Bu vesileyle SESRİK vesilesiyle bir araya gelmiş olmaktan çok mutluyuz. Burada SESRİK Başkanımıza, tüm çalışan ekibe teşekkür ediyorum. İnşallah süreç içerisinde 2021 yılında İslam İşbirliği Teşkilatı üyelerimizin daha geniş katılımıyla bu programları yapmayı arzu ediyoruz. Tekrar katılımlarınızdan dolayı size teşekkür ediyorum. yeni bir programda görüşmek üzere diliyorum. Esselamu Aleyküm.
Today, we have come together with such highly esteemed representative of our member countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation through CESRIC. We are here to share information and our experiences to overcome the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has seriously affected the whole world, especially persons with disabilities and the elderly. We believe that this meeting will further improve service provision for persons with disabilities and elderly in member countries. In this process, we have seen how influential our culture, civilization, and belief are in our approach towards persons with disabilities and the elderly. Thankfully, based on these values, we have always prioritized persons with disabilities and elderly in service provision. We have provided these services with the human first principle, universal human rights approach, and family-oriented perspective. The priority that was given in providing access to all public services, especially health and social services, was continued during the pandemic period as well. At this point, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all professionals who are selflessly on duty 24/7 in order to protect persons with disabilities and elderly and other vulnerable groups from the pandemic and to be least affected by the pandemic and all healthcare professionals around the world. In Western countries, unfortunately, we witnessed various problems, and that's due to the implementation of age triage, the problems of nursing home residents in accessing health services and being left to fend for themselves. Despite all this, we have provided and continue to provide high-level care to persons with disabilities and elderly people, which was mainly due to our highly committed care staff. In Turkey, we give importance to provide care services for persons with disabilities and elderly under the integrated care model in their community, specifically in their family environment. In this context, we support families primarily with home care support program, home health service program, supportive daycare services, and community-based services. In addition to these services, we also provide residential care services to citizens in need. I should note that our citizens benefit from all these services free of charge. In the last 18 years, Turkey has experienced a significant transformation that may set an example for many countries in all service areas for persons with disabilities and elderly and other vulnerable groups, as well as in the fields of health and social services. During this transformation, Turkey has further strengthened its family-based and supply-oriented social service policy. With the disability legislation of 1,500 articles that were issued in 2005 and the efforts to comply with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Turkey has made significant progress on the full and effective participation of persons with disabilities in the social life. With these developments, we ensure quality and equality of opportunity in education, implemented practices that support independent living, diversified our employment models, which significantly increased the employment rates of persons with disabilities both in the public and private sectors, and carried out important studies to extend accessibility in all areas of social life. In order to culminate all these efforts, the year 2020 was declared nationally as the Accessibility Year by His Excellency Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, President of the Republic of Turkey. In this scope, accessibility awards will be given in order to raise awareness and encourage good practices all over the country. Of course, in your countries, there are also critical services for persons with disabilities and elderly who are living in care institutions or in the community. We are here to share these experiences. On this occasion, I would like to thank CESRIC, who made this meeting possible, and distinguished experts who will share their knowledge and experience with us. I hope this meeting will be fruitful for all participants and the Islamic geography in order to recover together the negative effects caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Mr. Orhan Koç, for your insightful remarks and underscoring Turkey's efforts in this important domain. As you may all know, the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic varied for numerous socio-demographic groups. However, without any doubt, the vulnerable groups, including the elderly and persons with disabilities, were particularly affected. The impacts of the pandemic weren't exclusively affecting their physical health, but also their emotional well-being. Today, we are going to discuss these challenges and elaborate on solutions and best practices from different perspectives delivered by our valuable panelists. Let us start the panel with this aim with Dr. Cem Tintin, senior researcher at CESRIC, who is going to brief us on the overall state of elderly and people with disabilities in OIC member states. In this regard, the floor is yours, Dr. Tintin.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope you can hear me. Okay. And I hope that you can also see my screen. Okay. I will, Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen and excellencies, good morning. And today I will make a brief presentation on the state of elderly and persons with disabilities in OIC member states. I will talk on the state of elderly as well as persons with disabilities, but also towards the end of my presentation, I will also talk about some of the initiatives of the OIC in this domain before concluding. I think in order to discuss about the impacts of the COVID-19 on elderly and persons with disabilities, first we need to understand the state of them even before the pandemic. So therefore, most of the impacts are not coming from the vacuum, and therefore there are some, structural and historical background. So therefore, first we need to understand this. And I think we and you are all aware that without the effective contribution of elderly people and disabled people, it is not possible to achieve sustainable development. And also we know that because of the rapid globalization and urbanization, there is a growing demand for improved services for elderly people and persons with disabilities. And during the pandemic, this kind of demand for such services have just increased. So therefore, now the public institutions under increased pressure for this kind of services. I want to show you a couple of statistics regarding the trends in demographics in the OIC member states, because first we need to understand what is going in this area. First of all, I want to share this figure with you. The fertility rates are on the decline in the OIC countries as well as in the other country groups like the developed countries. So the children per woman is on the decline. And also, this is coupled with that the life expectancy is on the rise in the OIC countries. So as a result of these two factors, the share of elderly people in total population has been climbing up all across the globe, including the OIC countries. Traditionally, OIC countries are known as the countries with a relatively young population, but now I think over the past 2 decades, this is changing, and by 2030, it is forecasted that the share of elderly people in the OIC countries will reach to 9.3%. And also, it is estimated that the OIC countries as a group will host about 15% of the world's elderly people. So in 2020, it is around 13%. So in just 9 to 10 years, this will go up. And therefore, our countries need to be prepared from now on. And also what we know is that according to some studies, that increasing number of elderly people in OIC countries living alone. And because of globalization and urbanization, people tend to live with a small number of family members. And therefore, now increasing number of elderly people need to survive alone. And therefore, the public authorities and social services need to be provided to them in order to ensure their well-being and also to meet their demands. So this is also another factor that we need to take into consideration. Of course, there are some country level differences, but what we know is that the average of the OIC is around 17%. Also, what we know is that the non-communicable diseases remained as the leading cause of moderate and severe disability among the elderly people in OIC countries. Around 83% of, the non-communicable diseases are responsible for around 83% of the disabilities among the elderly people in the OIC countries. Also, what we see is that in the OIC countries, institutions and available services for elderly people and for their well-being are far from being inadequate, far from being adequate. So therefore, what we see is that, especially when it comes to the public social protection expenditure on benefits, when it is measured as a percentage of GDP, we see that in OIC countries, it is only 0.8%. However, the world average is 2.2%, and the average of the developed countries is around 3.7%. So another similar figure can be seen in this picture, which is showing the pension spending as a share of GDP. In the OIC countries, it is only 2.3%. However, when it comes to the developed countries, it is almost 3 times, which is around 7.7%. So what we have seen in these two pictures is that the OIC countries are facing with the challenge of aging population, and the available institutions and the available social services are not good enough to cover all the elderly people and to meet their demands. Now, I would like to give some brief information about the state of persons with disabilities in the OIC member states. As you know that the number of disabled people in the world is going up because of increased life expectancy. It is estimated that 1 out of every 7 persons has some kind of disability. And it is also forecasted that around 80% of people with disabilities living in the developing countries, including the OIC member countries, especially the conflicts, disasters, and aging population are the 3 major reasons that are explaining the increasing number of disabled people. And according to one study of CESRIC, around 60% of the conflicts are happening in the OIC countries. So therefore, OIC countries also paying a cost because of these conflicts. The number of people who are getting disabled is also going up. So it is also another challenge. So I want to also show you this picture because what we know is that persons with disabilities are facing with a number of challenges in their lives. And these are, some of them are poor health outcomes, lower educational achievements, less economic activity, higher rates of poverty, and limited independence. So this is independent from the shocks or pandemics. But when we see that the pandemic hits the vulnerable populations, these kind of outcomes tend to get worse. So even they cannot reach the employment opportunities, or their dependence on others tend to go up because the social services and available policy measures are not strong enough to cover all of the elderly and people with disabilities. Also, I want to show that the years of healthy life lost due to disability in OIC countries is relatively higher compared with the other groups of countries. For instance, in OIC countries, it is measured around 10.4, whereas the world average is around 9.7%. Of course, not all OIC regions have the same type of picture, such as many regions has a higher average than compared with the sub-Saharan Africa. I want to finish this part of my presentation because most of the indicators and statistics that I have shown to you are available in our 3 reports, which I will show you the cover pages of these 3 reports at the end of my presentation that you can download and you can read and examine these reports. So I think now I want to talk about the initiatives of the OIC. In order to address issues related with elderly people, the OIC developed and adopted the OIC strategy on the elderly last year in Istanbul. And this strategy is very important because it is reflecting a high-level political commitment by the OIC member states to improve the well-being of elderly people. And it is listing a number of policy measures in order to improve the well-being of elderly people through enhancing the intra-OIC cooperation. Also, in the domain of persons with disabilities, OIC has developed another action plan, which is called Draft OIC Plan of Action on People with Disabilities. The framework of this plan was submitted to the last year's OIC Ministerial Conference on Social Development, and I think it is expected that this plan will be adopted in the next year's OIC Ministerial Conference on Social Development. So let me conclude my presentation with a couple of remarks that what we know according to the statistics and figures, the OIC countries on average are aging. And this page of aging will bring new challenges to our healthcare systems, social security systems, and even on the family relations. And the issue is that that the policymakers need to address are two. First of all, they need to improve the well-being of elderly and persons with disabilities through developing policies and introducing new measures. And also, they need to maximize their contribution to the development of their societies, because they are part of the society and they are not just waiting for help. They want to also be productive members of their societies. So therefore, the policy makers need to also provide some services in order to benefit from their contribution to the development of their societies. And also, there are some significant differences across the OIC countries about their social and economic status, because OIC countries are not homogeneous group in terms of levels of development and in terms of level of income as well. So, but the statistics that we have are showing that the available institutional arrangements in the OIC region on average are not strong enough and are not as advanced as seen in developed countries. So therefore, many OIC countries need to exert additional efforts in order to meet the demand for services for elderly people and people with disabilities. But on the other hand, we also recognize that there are many successful initiatives and best practices among the member states of the OIC, which we shouldn't forget. And I'm sure the panelists in this session will brief us about such kind of successful initiatives and best practices from their respective countries. And also what we can say that the major challenges in the OIC member states can be summarized as follows when it comes to the groups of people, elderly and persons with disabilities, especially underinvestment into social security, lack of data and information, insufficient number of trained health professionals, and limited available units of rehabilitation services, and also cultural barriers and stereotypes are some of the main challenges. And of course, each of these challenges can be discussed truly, but because of time limitation, we cannot go into detail. Just two last points about the COVID-19. What we have seen is that the COVID-19 hit the OIC member states in a situation where elderly people and persons with disabilities have already been facing a set of enormous challenges, from social security to labor market practices. So therefore, this is, we as the OIC member states were already facing and struggling in some aspects, and plus now the COVID-19 hit. So therefore, now the burden on the member states institutions have much more than doubled. So therefore, it is a very big challenge, and many developing countries, including OIC countries, are trying to find ways how to address this increased demand for such kind of services. And I think we can hear from the member states who are present in this meeting that some of them have already developed and implementing some quick and effective policy responses in this year, and some of them even resulted in good outcomes. So therefore, many of the elderly people and persons with disabilities not suffered as expected because of these new policy measures and policy responses. So therefore, I think we are going to hear more from the panelists. And finally, I want to show the 3 reports of CESRIC in this domain, which you can find all the details of these statistics and also information about the state of people with disabilities and also state of people, elderly people in OIC countries, especially the last report, the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 pandemic in OIC member countries, is also giving a brief account of the pandemic, and also the report is analyzing the impacts of the pandemic on vulnerable groups, including elderly and persons with disabilities. So any interested person can download these reports from our website, which is cesric.org, and can examine these reports. I would like to thank you for your kind attention. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cem Tintin, Senior Researcher at CESRIC, for providing insights. If you allow me, Dr. Cem Tintin, I would like to quickly summarize what you have been discussed. In your presentation, you highlighted that OIC countries, on average, are aging. And this situation brings new challenges on healthcare systems, social security systems, labor markets, and even on family relations. And at the same time, you highlighted from the disability perspective, you highlighted that 1 out of 7 persons has a disability at global level. And you also underscored that conflicts, disasters, aging population at the same time tend to increase the number of people with disabilities in general. While mentioning these points, you also underscored that there's a growing concern on the shoulders of the officials of the government of the OIC states to improve the well-being of these vulnerable groups, elderly and persons with disabilities. And at the same time, you highlighted that, again, there is a pressure on the government officials to maximize the contribution of these vulnerable groups to the development, for the development of their societies. From the COVID-19 perspective, you highlighted that the COVID-19 adversely affected the OIC member states, where elderly people and persons with disabilities have already been facing a set of challenges and problems from social security perspective to labor market practices. And you have concluded your presentation by giving a good news that some OIC member states have developed and implemented some quick and effective policy actions and some activities in 2020 in order to mitigate the negative impact of COVID-19 on those vulnerable groups. And at the same time, in your presentation, you mentioned some of the strategic documents that CESRIC prepared, and you have highlighted that the contribution, the enhancement of intra-OIC cooperation is very important in such kind of situation, and it is also important in setting effective national policies. Thank you very much, Dr. Tintin, for the insights that you have provided. Now it is time to listen from country experiences in this regard. I would like to continue with Mr. Pepe Loa, the Chief of the Section at the Ministry of Social Action and Vulnerable Persons in Guinea. Mr. Pepe, we would highly appreciate if you could kindly brief us on the situation of elderly and persons with disabilities in Guinea, given the country's already existing challenges and economical constraints. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I think that everybody can hear me well. I am going to speak about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on elderly people and persons with disabilities in Guinea. And my plan, the presentation plan, will talk about the context, the social-economic context of the country, the impact of COVID-19 on elderly and persons with disabilities, and I will talk also about some social protection actions in favor of the two categories of people, the elderly and persons with disabilities, before coming to the conclusion. Next class. Hello? Okay, Let's talk about the context. Located in West Africa, Guinea has nearly 12 million inhabitants, about 60% of whom live in multi-dimensional poverty, and only less than 6% of the population has social security coverage. According to the World Bank, household well-being could decline because of the COVID-19 between 7% and 10% compared to the pre-crisis situation, based on the comprehensive analysis of food and nutrition security outcomes. Over 21% of households, or approximately 2.5 million people, are food insecure in Guinea. Next. The harmonized framework analysis of March 2020 has already identified 113,641 people in phase 3 of food insecurity and in need of immediate assistance. Moreover, COVID-19 is occurring in Guinea in a context where access to water, sanitation, and hygiene remains precarious. There are additional health risks, especially for dependent people like the elderly and persons with disabilities. The Guinean government declared on March the 12th, 2020, a state of health emergency throughout the territory due to the COVID-19 pandemic, after the country had just emerged from the Ebola epidemic in 2017. Next. COVID-19 cases have increased rapidly since then. Today, Guinea has 13,532 cases, including 80 deaths and 12,905 recoveries. Since March 2020, the government, in consultation with the United Nations country team, has taken several measures to contain and prevent the spread of the virus, including declaring health emergency, the closure of all schools from March to June, the closure of borders, hotels, places of recreation, places of worship, reducing the number of hours of trading on market, etc. Next. Now we're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on elderly people. These various measures taken by the government have had a considerable impact on households in the informal sector. The elderly people, because of the old age, are highly at risk of COVID-19, officially numbering 603,706 people in Guinea. Health professionals clearly affirm that the elderly are likely to develop acute complications in the event of contamination by COVID-19 because of their weak immune capacities, with little access to awareness measures, as well as prevention and hygiene kits. The elderly people are a priority in the fight against COVID-19. Next. As the elderly people are more fragile and dependent from households, they are the most affected by the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Currently in Guinea, many households barely earn a meal a day because of the increase in market prices and the scarcity of income due to the loss of jobs and the reduction of economic activities in the informal sector, which covers 80% of the population. This situation seriously affects, from a nutritional and a health point of view, the elderly people from these households. Next. Now we're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on persons with disabilities. As for persons with disabilities, they are much more affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. They are largely absent from social mobilization campaigns. Their physical status determines their social being. Living in all regions of the country, presently representing not less than 4% of the global population, persons with disabilities, in particular the sensory, hearing and visual, and the mentally handicapped, have little access to communication channels. They are found in categories of at risk, ignoring prevention measures, and deprived of protection and hygiene kits. Often living in areas defying any observance of barrier gestures, disabled beggar populations run the risk of community contamination. This category of the population, in particular children with disabilities, could be more exposed to the risk of violence and be affected by the illness or death of those who support them. From the point of view of access to care, according to the result of a study carried out in 2018, the factors preventing persons with disabilities from receiving care in accordance with their needs are two. First, factors related to social economic characteristics and cultural issues. Then we have also the obstacle related to service offering. Example, difficulties encountered by a disabled person when deciding to access health care. These health risks are directly linked to the social economic living condition of persons with disabilities, most of whom are unproductive and or have lower production capacity. Apart from a few who have managed to enter public administration or the private sector, many of them live on family support or collective arms near mosques on public roads. A few of them work in crafts, sewing, plastic, art, mechanics, tapestry, etc., and petty trade. Their physical state does not allow them to support hard work. That is why many of them are beggars. Next. So we are going to talk about some social protection actions in favor of them, of the elderly and people with disabilities. Building on the previous experience of the Ebola virus epidemic that occurred in Guinea from 2014 to 2017, the Guinean government, through the Ministry of Social Action and Vulnerable Persons, with the technical and financial support of the United Nations country team, have established a plan of immediate interventions. The objectives of these joint interventions are to support affected vulnerable communities, example, households living in national poverty, who earns or are not able to get 8,000 Guinean national francs, that's a day, that gives $0.84. And the population particularly vulnerable to COVID-19, the elderly and the persons with disabilities, in a situation of food insecurity and without adequate access to health care. From last August to the present day, these interventions have consisted of the distribution of health kits, foodstuffs to the identified number of people with disability and elderly in Conakry, Bokeh, and Kankan region. The implementation of these activities have seen the effective participation of persons with disabilities. They benefited from capacity building through the provision of equipment for the preparation of health kits, soaps, and masks, etc. So this photo is the Minister of Social Action and vulnerable person who is giving health kits to other people that are here. You can see. Yes, next. Next. Okay, the second picture is here. The second picture is one woman who has no hands, no legs, but can do everything, has completed her university studies, is married, has children, and is capable to do all what is concerned housework. Next. Yes, next. Yes, now we are coming to the conclusion. Analysis of the negative consequences of COVID-19 leads to the conclusion that they have drastically reduced the capacity of the government to make a significant contribution in the fight to reduce poverty. There is therefore an urgent need to review the existing social protection mechanism and instrument, which only cover 6% of the population. It is then imminent to think about the possibility of universalizing social protection, which is a right for everyone. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pepe, for sharing Guinea's experiences. Some of the highlights from your presentation, according to my notes, you highlighted that 60% of the people live in multidimensional poverty in Guinea. And due to COVID-19 pandemic, household well-being declined around 10% due to that situation. And also, you have highlighted in your presentation that during the pandemic, Guinea has taken several measures to contain and prevent the spread of the virus around the country. And also, you have highlighted that Guinea, building on its experience, previous experience on Ebola epidemic, and the technical and financial support received from United Nations Country Office, established a plan of immediate interventions, which also includes these vulnerable groups. And also you have highlighted some critical measures that have been taken by Guinea in a view to mitigate the negative impacts of the pandemic. Very insightful indeed. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences and joining us today. Now let us move to here. Now Morocco's experience. For that, I would like to ask another question to Mr. Mohamed Ait Azizi, Director of Promotion of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities at the Ministry of Solidarity, Social Development, Equality and Family in Morocco. Mr. Azizi, how did Morocco handle the critical situation of elderly and persons with disabilities during pandemic? And what are the measures that are taken at the national level? The floor is yours, Mr. Azizi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to share with you the experience of Morocco action and effort to address the COVID-19, the measure targeted toward a person with disability and the person already paper. First, next please. Next please. First, in this situation, you have a general strategy It's many measure who take it. It's obligation to wear mask, awareness campaign, quarantine, stay at home and not leave unless absolutely necessary. Creation of the coronavirus pandemic special fund to cover urgent expenses, making a military medicine expertise support to civilian medicine, including distance learning, and the continuous supply of essential products to market, ensure also to continue to function a basic public administration, and provide an epidemiological surveillance system through a national center and regional center for emergency operation. Next, please. This is a general action. First, you have a constellation of sporting, cultural, and artistic gathering and events, and also suspension of study in school and university, temporary closing a mosque, closing a Moroccan adverts and sea and land, suspension of court, also publication a decree law to promulgating provision relating to the state and health emergency, and closing of weekly market and non-essential public store, and creating a steering committee to monitor epidemiological situation. Next, please. And you have also in administration, you have many precautions to limit the holding of meeting, will making sure of the number of participants and using a modern technology, video conference, for example, and provide online administration services, organization of user reception operation in necessary case. And you have also developed digital services to enable and remote and attention rotation, the digital over office portal for administration correspondence, and also the electronic counter for administration correspondence. Next, please. Now I want to focus on a social measure, especially for person with disability and elderly person. Now you see in this picture distributing a health kit to women and people with disability in rural area. It's in this period. Next, please. For person with disability, you have many action. First, you have awareness campaign for prevention. You have prepared the preparation of COVID-19 website, contain many information for people with disability. Dissemination a set of awareness campaign of the emergencies and diarrhea virus in sign language, and on the COVID website, and via the ministry social media also. The launch of the Salama, it's a health kit which consists of providing a health bag to people with disability in the region, and also a simplification of administration procedure, the launch of Khadamati platform to process, to request to obtain a disability certificate. It's launched at 6 July, and designate a center of orientation and assistance of people and disability, as a structure belonging the Regional Commission of Entraide Nationale. Next, please. Also, we develop integrated remote services. A press release to published by the ministry concerning the pursuit of the activity in various centers concerned with education and training of disabled children with from work, support for the education of people with disability, and also a program consists in carrying and following operation, communicate with the parent and the children with disability, and offer then educational activity that can be carried out at home, pre-education and functional education also provided by specialists, by expert, and provide a psychological support to children, and provide also instruction and guideline to parents to overcome some psychological difficulty related to the period at home quarantine, and give preventive advice and instruction in accordance with the health protocol provided by the Ministry of Health. You have many association NGOs who participate at this operation, and you have also a family and many stakeholders. Next, please. You have also integrated the remote services, communication, counseling, guidance with available to family with autism. The ministry has set a communication, counseling, and guidance unity, supervise the national authority, set up as part of Rafiq, its program for autism professional, and the task of cell are defined as following: provide advice, guidance to parents, provide them with educational and behavior measure and procedure that be implemented for benefit of their children at home, provide also preventive instruction against coronavirus in according with provide international practice for benefit for people with autism, and provide answers to various questions of concern to people with autism. Next, please. For also, you have a distance education senior seminar program. It's we establish many platform for comparison 22 educational capsule intent for family and professional. And you have 5 acts normally. You have preschool education course to enable children with intellectual disability to acquire basic skills and learning ability. You have reading, writing, and math lesson for children. You have also medication rehabilitation guideline for people with cerebral palsy. We have a psychological counseling session for people with disability, and we have advice on development for psychomotor skills and ability for disability children. This episode is in Arabic and in Sini language, and also Amazigh language, and it's in you can see it in television for Morocco and all social media. Next, please. Next, please. For a person with already person, you have many support. You have distribution for Salama kits. It's health kits for social protection center for and already. You have many center, and you give him this Salama kits, and also you have awareness for to prevent COVID-19, creation a special website for the elderly, and preparation for an awareness capsule to enhance and tonsily physical activity adapted to already and people with reduced mobility, published at the website of ministry as part of quarantine. Please. You have 2 pictures who will show this, and you have housing of homeless already people in social establishment and designated space, remote advice, guidance, and support services as part of. You have ministry made an many action in website, and you have a list containing data and name of the senior manager and head of the department for already in the ministry, and a list of name of the phone on the regional coordination of the Entraide Nationale, and the guide to social protection institution for already has been drawn up by the competent authority in this regard. You have also some many action targeting a woman in a difficult situation, like reporting via the phone platform. One, we are all with you, كلنا معك, and many other action in the court. Next. And you have also many action to domestic violence data in the shadow for the pandemic. Next. Thank you very much, and I am very happy to participate in this webinar and share with you this information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Azizi, for your comprehensive presentation. In fact, you highlighted many points, but I would like to make a summary on them. You have mentioned that distribution of health kits to women and people with disabilities conducted in the rural and semi-rural areas in Morocco, based on the efforts of the government of Morocco. And at the same time, some awareness campaigns have been organized in and at the same time these campaigns has been presented in sign language on the COVID-19 website and through the social media of the ministry. You have mentioned that remote service support mechanisms has been developed and accordingly, these guidance, relevant advice to the vulnerable groups have been provided. You specifically highlighted the psychological support that has been provided to these vulnerable groups during these difficult times. And at the same time, the ministry, you mentioned that, has set up communication and counseling and guidance units supervised by the relevant national authorities in Morocco. In fact, these are the notes that I have taken among many others that you have highlighted as an effort of the government of Morocco and the ministry in order to mitigate the negative impacts of COVID-19 during these tough times on these vulnerable groups. Thank you very much for sharing the experience of Morocco, and congratulations for your efforts. With that, I would like to, if you allow me to proceed by giving the floor to our next panelist, Mr. Coşkun Gürboğa, Head of Elderly Services, Elderly Care Services at the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Services of the Republic of Turkey, who is going to elaborate on Turkey's experience during the pandemic. Mr. Gürboğa, can you please inform us and our viewers about the elderly profile in Turkey and the important measures as our other panelists mentioned has taken by Turkey and the procedures followed by your esteemed ministry in order to mitigate the coronavirus impact on the vulnerable groups. The floor is yours, Mr. Gürboğa.
Thank you, Mr. Çağlar. Before starting my presentation, I would like to thanks to this organization, to SESRIC. This is a good chance for us to explain COVID-19 period in our country for all our citizens and especially elderly and disabled people. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As the virus have begun spreading rapidly around the globe, countries have reacted to the threat by announcing a series of countermeasures accompanied by social restrictions in varying degrees. Turkey has begun taking such measures promptly through an effective cooperation with all concerned public and private institutions to prevent the outbreak from entering and spreading in the country. One of the most effective assets in fighting against the outbreak Turkey has at its disposal are the large number of hospitals and intensive care units per person. Next slide, please. The next one. Turkey has managing the COVID-19 situation since its inspection. Policymakers, regulators, and all economic authorities are vigilantly following the developments and are taking all necessary measures to ratio the health, education, labor, and social services. Education will continue online until the end of the year, and all sports competitions will continue to be played without an audience. Meanwhile, malls, markets, restaurants, and hairdressers will be open from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. throughout the week, with restaurants only providing delivery services. Public and private sectors workplaces are to allow flexible working hours for their employees in a way that does not create tension. The next slide, please. As Turkey declared a partial curfew for senior citizens aged 65 and over, WEFA Social Support Group in provinces and districts to help those in need, particularly who live alone or with chronic ailments. WEFA Social Support Group have reached more than 1.5 million senior citizens to meet their needs under the lockdown. The government has announced 1,000 Turkish liras payment for families in need for more than 2 million households. The aid is in cash, were delivered directly to the houses of the needy to make sure that social distancing measures are absorbed. The government has also dubbed funds to cover intensive care units treatment costs, paying hospitals, and extra 660 per day, 660 Turkish lira per day for each patient diagnosed with the coronaviruses. And I want to give some information about from this table. We have approximately 56,000 residents, disabled and elderly in long-term care institutions. This table only shows the elderly care institutions, but I'll give information about the disabled institution numbers. Number of public elderly care and rehabilitation centers are 157. Number of the municipalities elderly care and rehabilitation centers 25. Number of private elderly care centers is 2,048. Number of the public care rehabilitation centers for persons with disabilities is 104. Number of private centers for persons with disabilities, 285. We have 810 long-term care institutions for disabled and elderly in Turkey. Residents who were in long-term care institutions not to go outdoors, and staff had to work on fixed 7 or 10 or 14 days rota. They generously accepted being away from their families, and those who had a relative coming from abroad or had contact with an infected person were guaranteed administrative to leave. We do it on March up to now. Next slide, please. Another statistical information is about the chronic diseases profile in our elderly long-term care institutions. Heart diseases is very much, 27% of people had heart diseases, vascular diseases, and diabetes. You are seeing the numbers. I'm not going to say you the numbers as well, but despite the fact that each unit in our country has distinct disabilities to prevent the spread of COVID-19, our disabilities and elderly care institutions are one of the most essential posts regarding the measures to be taken. In countries where the virus has spread, the highest number of the losses are experienced in the public spaces, especially in care institutions, where the elderly people stay. Therefore, in order to prevent the spread of the virus in our disabled and elderly institutions, a number of specific measures were needed to be taken with precision. Thus, the measures we have taken especially designed for the protection of elderly people and personnel in our institutions and their health and well-being have been applied effectively and swiftly and been updated continuously according to the course of the pandemic in our country. However, the death rate from COVID-19 is still remained below 4% at elderly care homes in Turkey, thanks to the swift response and effective measures that we have taken in our institutions. Next slide, please. And in advance, the pandemic take place in our country. Preventive measures in our institutions we have taken as the beginning of January 2020. Firstly, precautionary infrastructure has been established in the public and private elderly care institutions. Secondly, necessary awareness has been raised and continuous health screening has taken place regarding the disease. Moreover, necessary personal protective equipments has been provided to organizations. On February, quarantine implementations to visitors, residents from abroad was applied for 14 days. On March, visits disabled and elderly care institutions are arbitrary departure to the residents were restricted. The next slide, please. Teamwork is very important, as shown at the presentation. We had a protocol with the Ministry of Health. We need doctors in the institutions and nursing homes. We have a material supply and stock tracking inventory. We created it. Thanks to our friends who created it, we provide PCR testing and general checkups to all staff clocking in and out on fixed shifts. We are trying to bring the process under control for each trip for elderly residents receiving our patient treatments outside the institution, for example, in hospitals or dialysis centers. Having a positive case is a big challenge in an institution like ours, but what it is more important is ensuring that the numbers do not increase to bring it under control. The next slide, please. Crisis desk was created in all provinces and the General Directorate in response to the epidemic. social isolation rooms, blocks, and units were created in the nursing homes and long-term disabled care institutions. The shift system of the personnel in the institutions for constant work for 7, 10, 14 days. COVID-19 PCR tests were performed at personal shifts. Yeah, the next slide, please. Nutrition, physical exercises, individual and group activities, psychosocial support is very important for disabled and elderly people. Quarantine measures meant visitors were not allowed into care homes, even though the staff continued with activities such as music groups and offering psychosocial support to residents. We encourage all our citizens to call their elderly parents or relatives on the phone. Okay, thank you. The next slide, please. And we say that we are a big family, and our disabled and elderly residents says, I am safe, bad days will pass, and all staffs are saying that we have worked so much, but our elderly faces smile. And evaluation and conclusion, the last slide, please. The other one, please. The next one. Okay. Social distance, mask, personal protective equipment, disinfections, social isolation units, the important things, room, floor, institution levels, application of PCR tests. It's very important for us. Constant shift system is very, very important. Fixed personal system to elderly, room, floor. We fixed the personal system, yeah. Updating the stock, case status, effective communication with the field, coordination with the provincial health directories, updated measures according to the recommendations of the Ministry of Health and Scientific Committee. Finally, during the pandemic, communication with the disabled and elderly residents in a long-term care centers continues effectively. The disabled and elderly who stay in our institutions express that they are quite satisfied with the measures taken and the services provided. Different solutions and alternatives are developed for the changes they experience in their daily life routines brought about the isolation process. Effective and frequent communication with our personnel performing their duties with the great dedication during the pandemic is maintained. Quick solutions for the problems experienced in the field and developed. The sum up in all areas related to the rapid response to the needs of the field is one of the most important factors that guide the course of the COVID-19 pandemic in our country, especially in our nursing homes. Thanks to all our staff and people who helped us for COVID-19. The next slide, please. Thanks to everyone for listening me. If you need for more information, please contact us. My email is written. Thank you for listening. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gürboğa, for your insightful presentation. At your presentation, in addition to the preventive measures which have been taken at the national level to contain and prevent the spread of COVID-19 pandemic since its inception, you're particularly focused on the COVID-19 measures taken in the disability and elderly long-term care services. In your presentation, you highlighted that entries and exits are restricted at those centers, masks are provided, social distancing and hygiene trainings were provided, and fever tracking systems were established. At the same time, you highlighted that Turkey successfully created crisis desks at all its provinces, and at the same time, at those specific centers, social isolation rooms and blocks and units were created in order to contain the pandemic. Personnel who are working at those centers received regular PCR tests, COVID-19 PCR tests, in order to early detect such kind of cases. And at the same time, fixed personal shifts were created. And more importantly, I would like to mention that you have provided psychological support to the residents of those long-term centers in order to avoid the feeling of loneliness and prevent potential anxieties during such important periods. Thank you very much, Mr. Gürba, for the highlights that you have mentioned. It was really delightful to hear Turkey's experience and best practices. Last but not least, I am pleased to give the floor to Mr. Anthony Enyogu, the National Disability and Aging Specialist at the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development of Uganda. Mr. Enyogu, can you please brief us on how did Uganda deal with emerging challenges during COVID-19 pandemic? And are there any specific measures taken during this period towards the well-being of the vulnerable groups, such as elderly and persons with disabilities, in your respectful country? The floor is yours, Mr. Enyogu.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I'll do this presentation. The presentation is laid out in this way, that we have a background, then we'll look at the situation of older persons in Uganda. Kindly go to the next page. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we look at the actions undertaken by the government of Uganda in terms of implementing COVID-19 interventions. And then we'll also look at some recommendations and discussions and the next steps. So just to start, I want to say that government of Uganda implements a community-based and inclusive approach towards implementation of programs relating to persons with disabilities. However, from the time the first case of COVID-19 was detected in Uganda, that was the 21st March 2020, the situation has kept changing. Stand steps to avert the spread of the virus through lockdown. You realize that when the COVID-19 was first detected, it was taken to be pretty much of a health issue, but as time turned out, it turned out to be pretty much of a social security and security issue. So as time went on, there were changes that were realized in both the social development arena as well as the health arena. Current statistics indicate that COVID-19 is on the rise, and so is the negative impact. In Uganda, Uganda has been placed among the top 3 countries in Africa besides Morocco and South Africa with the highest rate of infection, or the rate at which the virus is spreading. Uganda's cumulative COVID-19 cases as of 16th December 2020 were at 28,168, and the cumulative deaths due to COVID-19 stood at 225. As we speak, we are in 240. There has been a sharp rise in the COVID-19 new positive infections and deaths in November and December. We have seen that in December alone, the COVID-19 infections have doubled what was recorded in November. Kindly go to the next slide. Go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, as I said, currently, because the testing, the people have to meet the cost of testing, and it is quite high, it is quite expensive. It stands at around $70 to do a single COVID-19 test in Uganda. Only up to 700,000 people have been tested. And out of this, if you have a 30,000 who have tested to be positive, then the likely prevalence of COVID-19 in Uganda stands at around 4.1. So as you see in the graph, you are realizing that the infections as well as death have been increasing over the time. We seem to be tripling or even going beyond with the coming months, and this is mainly due to the increase in the community infections. So, next slide. Next slide, please. So to continue, government of Uganda in some of its interventions to monitor the COVID-19 looks at the vulnerability measurements. And these, among others, include the regional imbalances and epidemiological predispositions and health center coverage, whereby looking at which regions of the country have the least coverage of health facilities and also are predisposed to COVID-19, including the western part of the country. Then definitely we're also looking at the poverty levels. Poverty is the key predisposing factor for COVID-19, and government of Uganda rightly monitors that. Then of course age. Older persons being part of this are being monitored and supported in the process. Because of the standard operating procedures, including the restrictions and guidelines on hand washing, issues around the facilities or resources on water, sanitation, and hygiene are really key, and they support in this, in the management, in the prevention of the spread of COVID-19. However, we realize that some regions of Uganda are really doing badly. For example, in the Karamoja region, we see that coverage, the water hygiene coverage is at 15%, which is way, way too low. And finally, connectivity, because as a result of the lockdown, there have been a lot of restrictions on even access to information. And in this case, access to internet becomes a key issue, and it's the older persons who are mainly affected, not only but communication, newspapers, radio, TV, television. It is mainly the older persons and persons with communication disabilities who are affected by this kind of scenario. And now in Uganda, our social media platforms have to have an over-the-top tax. So many people cannot afford that tax, will definitely miss out on this connectivity. As you realize from this presentation, persons with disabilities are always left out in the periphery. So Uganda's national policy for older persons 2009 uses the UN standards to define an older person as one aged 60 years and above. Definitely, the world is moving away from this chronological definition or description of older persons to a contextual one, which is into other aspects of health and wellness. But we seem not to be agreeing on what should constitute older persons. Then the Person with Disabilities Act 2020 defines a disability as a substantial or functional limitation of person's daily life activities caused by physical, mental, or sensory impairment and environmental barriers, resulting in limited participation in society on equal basis with others, and includes an impairment as specified in the Schedule 3 of the Act. So older persons with disabilities are quite homogeneous and are considered to be highly vulnerable and usually left at the bottom of the development table. Government of Uganda has a signatory to a number of conventions and protocols relating to older persons and persons with disabilities, and cannot afford to leave anyone behind in any intervention. Next slide, please. Next slide. Let's go to the next slide. So, next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, next slide. All right. The predisposing factors for COVID-19 among persons with disabilities in Uganda are partly the porous borders, which increase the risk, and definitely old age. We have the percentage of older persons 60 years and above in Uganda is 1.93, which is a very sharp high growth. Of course, we are also seeing the increase in the number of older persons in the country. And that shouldn't be the bigger issue. The issue should be how independent they are, how well catered for they are, and what kind of dignity they have. And in that case, we see that the old age dependency ratio in Uganda is at 7.4%. So that is the old age dependency ratio. Now, again, persons with disabilities constitute 12.4% of our population. In Uganda, just like in most African settings, older persons often rely on younger kin for material and social support. In the absence of filial and family support laws, this is left to the control of the mechanical social solidarity, that is the state. Similarly, 78.6% of Ugandans older persons and persons with disabilities stay in rural settings with limited connectivity, banking and financial services. Part of healthcare is really poor. So what does this mean? The lockdown restricted movement, transport and communication. That coupled with the panic and anxiety, there was little or nothing left at all going to the older person and to persons with disabilities in terms of care and support. Next slide. Next slide, thank you. So which steps are taken by government in order to respond, in order to be disability inclusive? I want to tell you that most of these steps at first were not disability inclusive, but as time went on, they turned out a number of actors came in to support in making them disability and age inclusive. So one, there was a design of standard operational procedures for engagement of older persons with disabilities in the mitigation measures. This came after a number of reports were made, especially persons who were caught on the wrong side of the law. We are aware of some persons with disabilities, around 7, who were shot by security personnel as a result of not hearing and not understanding what the curfew laws meant. Then there was distribution of relief food to households. All persons with disabilities were left out until the subs were released. So, and by the time the subs were released, distribution of the food items had ended. So there was also, the government also allowed transportation of the sick, who also, among others, included persons with disabilities and older persons. Then, as time went on, government started having COVID-19 messages in alternative modes, including sign language. There was a resumption in the cash transfers for older persons with support from the UK government and the Irish Aid. Then currently, in December 2020, government has just announced, it announced on Monday that the vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines will be ready starting in May 2021, and older persons will be prioritized in the reception of the vaccines. Around May, June, and part of this was used to prepare a direct income support program for 350,000 extremely vulnerable persons with disabilities for 6 months, although this was not effected. This was not effected because the resources were not received, and so it couldn't be implemented. In the course of this week, there has been a soft appeal for those in cities and towns not to travel for Christmas, because they may end up infecting the older persons who are mainly based in the countryside. So basically, that is what has been undertaken by government of Uganda in order to to improve or to make consideration for persons with disabilities and older persons in Uganda. So, but back to the topic, what was the impact of this? Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. In the first place, because of the tension, the fear, the anxiety that came with the lockdown, many people lost their jobs. The loss of jobs meant that persons with disabilities who perhaps could not multitask were the first to be laid off, but also to the older persons who depended on their younger kin, they could no longer get this support. For example, a taxi driver in Kampala stated that my taxi business used to feed over 80 people. I have a family of 13, including my late brother's children. I have my grandparents to look after, the taxi touts, city transport supervisors, traffic police officers to take Kitu Kidogo. Kitu Kidogo is a bribe, the fuel pump attendants, the mechanics, and the ones who wash the taxis at the end of the day are all affected when I do not work. Government has not given us relief food, and we may end up starving to death or even before Corona comes. So that was a very, very strong statement. The loss of jobs was responsibilities and older persons. Then definitely as government provided relief services, relief food items, these items could not easily reach persons with disabilities. So, and so are the face masks, the other hand facilities. They are designed in a way that they are not disability friendly to cater for persons with various disabilities. Then there were definitely a lot of communication barriers that were realized, especially to reach, the messages did not reach older persons and persons with disabilities. Public information was not in accessible formats, and neither can majority of older persons afford radios, televisions, phones, where the COVID-19 information is mainly relayed. Then there was limited representation of older persons and persons with disabilities and their cohorts specific on the forces. One, the relief items, government in June, as one of the measures to lift the lockdown, decided that they would provide face masks to all people. The challenge with face masks is that they never reached all people, they didn't even reach 10% of people. Secondly, the face masks themselves were not inclusive for persons with mainly the deaf and the deafblind who rely on other means of communication. And so the community of the deaf and the deafblind have always advocated for the use of face shields, which allow for communication because their communication goes the voicing beyond what is heard. So next slide, please. Next slide. As the next slide comes, there was definitely issues around violence against women, disabilities mainly, older persons, due to stress, conflict over property and food. This was exacerbated by the halt in the policing system to avert and manage the situations. Because now people were so much, and people have continued scrambling for the little resources. Land is a key capital resource that older persons custodian all for long, and because the younger kin were in cities undertaking other formal kind of engagements, because of the loss of jobs and the downsizing and the closure, they came back to their rural areas and they started farming. So there was a scramble for land, and that caused violence. There was intimate partner violence that was reported and not attended to, unfortunately, and the persons with disabilities were so much affected by this. As a result of that, there has been a rise in mental health cases and the deterioration of the such as unmanaged stress and depression. As we are all aware, aging that require adequate attention. So with all the factors in place, there was a deterioration of the mental health related cases. Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you about the new and emerging evidence in Uganda Also, just like in the other world, in the world over, it shows that older persons aged 60 years and above are 5 times more likely to die of COVID-19. The analysis of the Ugandan statistics shows that whereas the deaths so far stand at 46% for those aged between 30 and 59, and lesser for older persons, the likeliness that one will die of COVID-19 when they're in their old age, 60 years and above, is 2.89% in Uganda. And the lack of disability disaggregated data on the other part makes it a little complicated for governments to support interventions that target persons with disabilities in as far as preventing and managing COVID-19 is concerned. Let's move on. The next slide, please. Next slide. Food insecurity that continues to bite older persons with disabilities is on the rise because the seasons have not been that good. There has been difficulty in movement and participation, high cost of transport. The transport costs have now risen 10-fold from the time the lockdown started. Then, of course, the psychological torture experienced by older persons and persons with disabilities, also leading to psychosocial and mental health related conditions. Due to communication and connectivity barriers, older persons with disabilities ended up being caught on the wrong side of the law. I talked about the persons with disabilities who were shot at by security personnel as a result of not understanding the communication, the standard operating procedures. Loss of school time, whereas many countries got into this whole innovation of TV learning and media learning, many persons with disabilities with communication disabilities could not access this curriculum. So, and many of the persons with disabilities, many the children in learning and in continuing their education because of this lack of their inclusion in the learning process, in the online learning processes. Then, of course, malnutrition due to lack of alternative diets, which is also a predisposing factor for COVID-19, is on the rise. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. Health Age and the Uganda Refugee Association in Uganda undertook a rapid assessment on the impact of COVID-19 in Ugandan refugee settlements. And the findings partly indicated that the main challenges that older persons in refugee settlements faced as a result of COVID-19 were difficulty in accessing food, which was at 68%. 57% of older persons had difficulty in accessing health care services. Older persons had difficulty in accessing drinking water. And there was difficulty in accessing humanitarian assistance, which was at 4%. The study observed that persons with disabilities were disproportionately affected when compared to the total population. So 75% for food, 62% for health, and 47% for humanitarian services. And that is in the Ugandan refugee settlements. Then abandonment of older persons and persons with disabilities is also on the rise because the persons who would have provided care and support to older persons and persons with disabilities are failing to provide their own care and support, and hence they find providing care and support for older persons and persons with disabilities as an opportunity cost. These conditions are perpetuated by the continuation of the standard operating procedures and directives without prior consideration of older persons and persons with disabilities on their socio-economic and political life, and particularly the impact on their independence, dignity, and living. We should note that in Uganda, we have had 3 major challenges this year. The first challenge was with the coming of the locusts, which really destroyed regions and farming, especially in the Karamoja and the eastern part of the country. The second one has been COVID-19. And thirdly, we are into a very volatile election period, which also comes with its own challenges. Now, what are the implications of this on the lives of older persons? there is most likely to be an increase in the older persons and persons with disabilities mortality due to COVID-19. Likely erosion of the moral and cultural fabric, a critical role played by older persons, the loss of dignity as a result of unprecedented social relations, and absolute dependence for living and care for both persons with disabilities and older persons, and hence the loss of residual independence. Then, just move to the next slide, please. Increase in the burden of care due to skipped generations as a result of COVID-19 mortality. As we said, 46% of the persons aged between 30 and 59, I mean, the mortality so far due to the death due to COVID-19 stand at 46% for persons aged between 30 and 59 years. So there is also likely to be a skipped generation who are going to be looked at after by older persons who do not even have the means to look after the children that are left behind. At a personal level, the mental and psychological breakdown as a result of the social distancing and the information reaching out to older persons and persons with disabilities as being at high risk of mortality due to COVID-19 is inevitable. So we have to do something about the packaging of the information. So this social dichotomy based on age and disability is likely to be further driven by vulnerability due to the reduction in the care provision by other persons. Whereas due to skipped generations, older persons, particularly women, tend to provide care to other young kids. This is diminishing, and with the social distancing campaigns, the scramble for the meager resources, conflict over capital resources, especially land by the younger generations, a claim of inheritance of property rights of the living. Imagine inheriting property rights of the living, older persons, and other forms of abuse are likely to be on the increase. The recommendations. We suggest that we attune support for the prevention and recovery to the rights of older persons. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah. And we're also saying that we need to strengthen the social protection mechanisms, particularly the social care and support provided to persons with disabilities. We go to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, we need to also address the shocks and value of COVID-19 by developing a direct income support program to ensure income security of older persons and persons with disabilities, and to adopt immediate and socio-economic relief measures and social safety nets, such as guaranteed access to food, water, essential goods and services, and basic health care during the COVID-19 crisis and thereafter. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. We need to include all persons and persons with disabilities in economic recovery programs by removing age restrictions, accelerating lifelong learning, addressing high risk of vulnerability faced by persons with disabilities and older persons, and ensuring meaningful participation of older persons and persons with disabilities by consulting with them, and then promoting universal access to health care and adequate old age benefits, among others. Then in general, next slide. Next slide. Next slide, please. This is our final slide. I'm saying that in general, in order to narrow the age and disability dichotomy, there is need to view the pandemic as an opportunity to address the overarching challenges faced by older persons and persons with disabilities. Member states, as well as their partners, need to further invest in most vulnerable persons in order to lessen the impact of the pandemic on them. COVID-19 recovery is an opportunity to set the stage for more inclusive, equitable, and age-friendly society anchored in human rights and guided by the shared promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of leaving no one behind. I want to thank you so much. That is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Enyogu. for your insightful presentation and sharing Uganda's experiences. You have very successfully assessed the impact of COVID-19 on the elderly persons and persons with disabilities in Uganda. And at the same time, you have very successfully identified the challenges and by recommending policies and practices for improving the well-being of elderly persons and persons with disabilities, particularly in Uganda and the OIC member states in general. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. And it is very clear that enhancing inter-OIC cooperation is definitely needed more than ever, especially during these tough times. Dear participants, if you allow me, I would like to summarize the panel discussion. It was a great pleasure to listen our valuable panelists and touch upon this important topic throughout this webinar. Of course, it was a concern for all countries and societies. As OIC member countries, we faced a global challenge and timely taken steps and measures have taken to protect the vulnerable groups. It helped, of course, to mitigating the negative effects of COVID-19 on these groups. However, as we learned from our panelists, there are still many gaps in the social services systems, and effective communication mechanisms needed to be developed in order to take more concrete steps in our member countries. Referring to the comprehensive presentations, I would like to highlight that the key steps needed to tackle these challenges are to encourage policymakers to continue prioritizing elderly and disability inclusion efforts and to set effective policies towards more responsive social service systems. This could be achieved, of course, through awareness raising campaigns and effective dialogue mechanisms between the relevant public authorities and, of course, private institutions taking part in these processes. I am confident that the strategic documents at the OIC level, which are centered, spared no efforts towards the development of these reports and adaptation processes at OIC level, would guide the decision makers and the officials in setting and aligning national policies and raise more awareness on this important matter to include the disability dimension in the national prevention, mitigation, and monitoring plans. I would like to thank our valuable panelists for their insightful presentations and successful policies of their respected countries. And I hope our member countries can collaborate more and support each other during these challenging times. We are so delighted to hear many success stories and good practices implemented by the relevant authorities, shared by our guests representing different regions of the OIC. Thank you all once again for enriching the panel discussions today. With this, we come to the end of our webinar today, which was jointly organized by CESRIC and the Directorate General of Disabled and Elderly Services at the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Services of the Republic of Turkey. Thank you all for designating your valuable time and listening to our webinar. I wish you all a very happy New Year filled with prosperity, and thank you very much. Stay safe and